August 15, 2002. Bassett, Virginia, a town nestled in the rolling hills of southern Virginia, where the days seemed to stretch lazily under the weight of summer's warmth. The quiet hum of small-town life, where everyone knew everyone else, and the world felt distant, safe, almost. In a home just off one of Bassett's quiet streets, the Short family lived: Michael, Mary, and their young daughter, Jennifer. Michael was a simple man, a hard-working father and husband, who ran a small business, Mobile Home Movers. His life seemed grounded, steady. Mary, his wife, dedicated to her family, shared in the calm simplicity of their life. And then there was Jennifer, a bright-eyed, 9-year-old girl full of promise, her future wide open before her. She was the kind of child who would wave at passing strangers and offer a smile to those she passed by. The kind of child who had not yet learned that the world could be cruel. For years, the Short family's life had been an ordinary one. Until that night, the night of August 14th. What happened behind those closed doors shattered everything. In the early hours of the morning, as the rest of the town slept, something unimaginable happened here. Michael, 50, and Mary Short, 36 years old respectively, were found dead in their beds. Shot while they slept. No screams, no sign of struggle. They were killed while they slept, in the dead of night, as though their lives meant nothing. As though someone had been watching, waiting, planning. And their daughter, Jennifer, was gone. Vanished. No one knew where she was, or why anyone would want to harm her family. There were no clues, no answers, just questions, each one leading to another, like a tangled web that refused to be unraveled. Investigators scoured the home. They found Michael and Mary's bodies, lying in their bed, the blood still fresh, the gunshots leaving no doubt of the brutality of the attack. The phone lines had been cut before the murders. No one had heard a thing. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of a struggle. And there was no obvious motive. No robbery. No ransom note. The house was left exactly as it had been the night before, save for the two lifeless bodies on the bed. What kind of killer moves like this? A family killed in their sleep, and no one has any idea why. Was it random? A crime of opportunity? Or was this something more personal? A calculated attack on a family who had no reason to suspect that anything was wrong. And then, there was Jennifer, the 9-year-old girl who was taken. Why her? Why not Michael? Why not Mary? Why take the child and leave the parents behind? And where was she now? Was she still alive? Or was she just another part of the tragedy that had struck this family so suddenly and violently? The community of Bassett was shaken to its core. Neighbors, friends, even strangers, all were left with one question. Why? Why would someone do this? And why to a family like the Shorts? They weren't wealthy. They weren't in the spotlight. They were just an ordinary family, living an ordinary life in an ordinary town. Yet, in a matter of hours, their lives were destroyed. The search for Jennifer began immediately, and for days, the town of Bassett buzzed with questions and fears. Was she alive, or had she been taken to a place far from here? As days turned into weeks, the mystery deepened. Jennifer remained missing, and each passing day left the town with more questions and fewer answers. The investigation seemed to circle back on itself, unraveling with every new lead, every new discovery. August 14, 2002. What began as a typical summer night ended in a tragedy that would haunt the town of Bassett for years to come. Michael and Mary Short were gone. Their daughter, Jennifer, was taken. The pieces of the puzzle didn't fit. The answers didn't come, and the darkness that descended on their quiet home left a trail that no one could follow. What happened here, on that summer night, is a mystery that still remains unsolved to this day. And the questions only multiply with time. What would you do if your family were ripped apart in such a way? How could a tragedy like this happen in such an ordinary place? Subscribe to stay with us as we continue to piece together the terrifying details of the Short family's murder, a mystery that has yet to be solved. In a small town like Bassett, Virginia, it's easy to blend into the background. Life moves slowly here, with a pace that allows you to think, to breathe, to live without much interruption. For Michael Short, that was the kind of life he had built for himself and his family. A quiet life, but one that was filled with purpose. Michael Short wasn't a man who sought the spotlight. His work was his pride. He owned Mobile Home Movers, a small but growing business that he had poured his heart into. The business specialized in transporting mobile homes, a tough, manual job that required patience and precision. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. And for Michael, that was enough. His hands were calloused from years of labor, but his eyes always held a glimmer of hope. Hope for a better future, for him, for his wife, and for their daughter, Jennifer. Mary Short, his wife, was the steady force behind their family. She wasn't the type to seek attention, but her love and support for Michael were unwavering. While Michael worked on his business, Mary kept their home in order, making sure their daughter, Jennifer, had everything she needed. Her life revolved around the family she had created, a life built on quiet routines and a sense of security. Mary was the heart of the family, a mother who was always there, always looking out for her family's well-being. Her love for Michael was unconditional, and her dedication to Jennifer was unshakable. Mary wasn't just a mother, she was the anchor that kept their family grounded. She had no grand ambitions, but her life was one of quiet, consistent love. And that, in its own way, was everything. And then there was Jennifer. At just 9 years old, Jennifer Short was the kind of child who made you believe in good things. Her laughter was contagious, her smile infectious. She was a child full of promise, a bright student with a future ahead of her that seemed limitless. She was loved by everyone who knew her, and her presence brought light to those around her. She had her whole life ahead of her, dreams, hopes, and the kind of innocence that only a child can carry. Interview with one of Short's neighbors. Jennifer was a beautiful little girl, always polite, always smiling. You couldn't meet her without feeling like the world was just a little bit better. She had this light about her, you know? I never once saw her without a smile on her face. She was a child of small-town dreams. Jennifer loved school, loved her friends, loved her family. There was no indication that anything would ever disrupt her innocent world. For Jennifer, life was full of simple joys, the warmth of summer afternoons, the sound of her parents' laughter, and the excitement of school projects. She had yet to fully understand the complexities of the world, the darker parts that often lurk just out of sight. She was just a little girl, living her life, unaware that it would be taken from her in the most violent way. Michael, Mary, and Jennifer. A family that seemed like any other. Hard-working, loving, ordinary, but as is often the case, when tragedy strikes, it strikes without warning, without reason. And when it came for the Short family, it did so in the most unimaginable way. In the blink of an eye, everything they had known, everything they had built, was shattered. A quiet evening in a peaceful town became the backdrop for a crime that no one could explain, no one could understand. Michael and Mary were taken from this world in a moment of unimaginable violence. And Jennifer, their bright, beautiful daughter, was gone, vanished without a trace. The family that had once been full of hope, full of love, was now a family torn apart. The questions that would follow their deaths would haunt everyone who knew them, everyone who loved them. What happened to the Short family? Why were they targeted? And what became of Jennifer? These questions would send investigators scrambling, lead to dead ends, and stir the hearts of everyone who heard their story. It was a mystery that would only deepen with time, a tragedy that seemed impossible to understand. It was a Wednesday evening, August 14, 2002, when Michael Short last spent time with an employee of his, Chris Thompson. The two were working on one of Michael's trucks, tinkering away at the motor in the late summer heat. They were alone in the quiet of the evening, wrapping up their tasks as the sun began to set behind them. It was an ordinary night in the small town of Bassett, Virginia, where everything seemed in its place. When Chris Thompson finished his work for the night, he headed to the motel where he had been staying. He had no reason to believe that anything was wrong. Life in Bassett was always quiet, predictable, even. The following morning, though, would prove that nothing would ever be the same for the Short family. By 9 a.m. on August 15th, Chris Thompson arrived at the Short home, planning to meet up with Michael and drive together to Christiansburg to pick up a truck for the business. As he approached the house, something didn't sit right. The garage door was wide open, unusual for the early morning hours. He assumed Michael might be inside, either working or asleep. Michael sometimes slept on the couch in the garage, especially if his snoring had kept Mary awake the night before. Chris walked into the garage, expecting to find Michael lounging on the couch, perhaps still resting from the night's work. But when he got closer, something stopped him. Michael wasn't sleeping. What he found would change everything. Michael Short was lying motionless, a victim of gunshot wounds, his life stolen in the quiet of the night. It was the kind of scene that felt too unreal to comprehend, too violent for a town like Bassett. Chris immediately called the authorities. The police arrived shortly after, and what they found inside the Short family's home would only deepen the mystery. Michael's wife, Mary, was also dead, shot while she slept in their bedroom. No struggle, no forced entry, no signs of a robbery. In fact, nothing had been taken from the house. The $600 cash Michael had left on the kitchen counter remained untouched. It was as if the killer had no need for money, no need for anything other than death itself. The phone lines had been cut, a calculated move to prevent anyone from calling for help. And yet, the most disturbing detail of all, the one that would torment investigators for months to come, was the disappearance of young Jennifer Short. Jennifer, the Short family's 9-year-old daughter, was gone. No one knew where she was. No one knew why she had been taken, or why she had been singled out. The brutality of the crime made no sense. Why were Michael and Mary killed while they slept, and why was Jennifer abducted? It was as if the killer had come for her specifically, yet no one could understand why. The lack of forced entry made it clear that the killer, or killers, had known the family. Michael, Mary, and Jennifer didn't just seem like innocent victims, they seemed like targets. But for what reason? Was it a personal vendetta? Did someone have a motive that had nothing to do with robbery or violence for its own sake? Theories immediately began to form. Had someone close to the family committed this act? A former friend, a disgruntled acquaintance? Perhaps a business deal gone wrong, or a troubled past catching up with them? With each unanswered question, the case grew colder. And with Jennifer's disappearance, the search for answers became more urgent, more desperate. Where was she? What had happened to her? Why was she taken? Days turned into weeks. The search for Jennifer went on, but every lead was either a dead end or led nowhere. No one could explain what had happened that night, and the investigation seemed to reach its own limits. Then, just as the investigation seemed to stall, an unexpected discovery would send shockwaves through the case. A discovery that would reopen old wounds and make everything even more complicated. Jennifer Short's body was found weeks later, hidden in a remote area, miles from her home. September 10, 2002. Jennifer's remains were found under a bridge along Grogan Road, about 50 miles away from her home. The location of her body, hidden in a secluded, hard-to-reach spot, seemed to tell its own story. Why had the killer chosen this particular place to dispose of her body? What did it mean? Was it an attempt to mislead the investigation, or was there something more to it? It wasn't just the death of Michael and Mary Short that disturbed Bassett. It was the disappearance of Jennifer, the one piece of the puzzle that refused to fit. And as time went on, the question became clear. Who could do something like this? Who could destroy a family in such a cold, calculated way? August 15, 2002. The sun had risen on a town that would soon be marked by tragedy. Bassett, Virginia, once a place where neighbors waved to one another as they passed, became the epicenter of a mystery no one could unravel. The murders of Michael and Mary Short, and the abduction of their daughter Jennifer, had shaken the community to its core. As authorities arrived at the scene, the questions started piling up. There was no sign of forced entry, which suggested that whoever was responsible had some familiarity with the family. They knew where to go, when to strike. But what did they want? Money? Revenge? And why was Jennifer, only 9 years old, taken? The lack of any obvious motive deepened the mystery. No money had been taken from the house. The phone lines had been deliberately cut, a calculated move designed to prevent anyone from reaching out for help. This was no random act of violence. Whoever did this had planned it. They knew exactly what they were doing. The investigation quickly expanded, but no one seemed to have answers. There were no witnesses, no suspects, no sign of a struggle inside the house. Michael and Mary's bodies had been discovered in their own bed, their lives stolen while they slept. Their daughter was gone, and so began a search that would stretch on for weeks. The days passed, but the investigation seemed to hit a wall. The Short family had kept to themselves, and no one seemed to know why they had been targeted. Was it something personal? Was Michael's business, MS Mobile Home Movers, involved in a deal gone wrong? Had Mary or Jennifer been the intended targets? The unanswered questions seemed to grow with every passing day. Every lead that was followed, every theory that was pursued, ended in dead ends. No one could explain the lack of a robbery or the deliberate nature of the crime. The killer had not left any fingerprints, no weapons, no DNA, nothing to tie them to the scene. The biggest mystery, the one that held the investigation in its grip, was the abduction of Jennifer Short. Why her? And where was she? The theory of a random attack seemed less and less likely. This wasn't some haphazard crime of opportunity. Someone had come into that home with a specific purpose, yet no one knew what that purpose was. The search for Jennifer intensified. Authorities and volunteers scoured the nearby woods, every inch of the land combed in hopes of finding some trace of the missing child. Search dogs were brought in, but with no sign of Jennifer or the person who had taken her. As days turned into weeks, the community's hope began to fade. Had Jennifer been taken far away? Was she alive? Every possibility seemed equally terrible, every theory equally far-fetched. And yet, somewhere in all of this chaos, an unexpected twist would emerge that would send the investigation in a new direction. In early September, the investigation would take an unexpected turn when Jennifer's body was found. It was a discovery that shocked everyone and changed the direction of the case in ways no one could have predicted. On September 10th, Jennifer Short's remains were found under a bridge along Grogan Road. Hidden in the woods, far from home. The location was remote, isolated, almost as if the killer had deliberately chosen it to hide any trace of their actions. But why had they chosen this place? The discovery raised even more questions. Why leave Jennifer so far from home? What message, if any, had the killer intended to send? Had the body been hidden in an attempt to mislead the investigation? And if so, what else had the killer planned, and why? As the days passed and the search for the killer stretched on, investigators were left with little to work with. No solid leads, no eyewitnesses, just a series of disconnected clues that seemed to lead nowhere. But still, the case remained open. The investigation continued. The hope that somewhere, someone held the key to this tragedy kept the authorities pressing forward. The question remained: who could do something like this, and why? It was a case that seemed to have no end. Weeks turned into months, and months into years, but the murder of Michael and Mary Short, and the disappearance of their daughter Jennifer, remained a puzzle without a solution. Despite all the efforts, all the hours spent combing through evidence, there was still no clear explanation for why the Short family was targeted. No clear motive, no solid leads, no answers. One of the strangest aspects of this case, from the very beginning, was the lack of a clear motive. The murders were brutal. Michael and Mary had been killed while they slept, and yet, nothing had been stolen from the home. In fact, $600 in cash was left untouched on the kitchen counter. A burglary gone wrong? It didn't seem to fit. There was no ransom demand, no note, no obvious reason why the family was targeted. At first, investigators thought it might be a robbery gone wrong. Maybe someone had come looking for money, for something of value. But when nothing was taken, and the cash was left behind, the theory didn't hold up. That left only one possibility. The killer knew the family, or at least knew their habits. As the investigation continued, the focus shifted. Could the killer have been someone who knew Michael and Mary? Someone close to them? A neighbor, a colleague, or even a distant relative? Investigators looked into everyone who had ever interacted with the Short family. They examined Michael's small mobile home moving business, his connections, and even the personal lives of those around him. But still, the motive remained elusive. Then, as investigators struggled to make sense of it all, a disturbing theory began to take shape. Jennifer. Could she have been the intended target? After all, she was the only one who had been taken. Michael and Mary had been killed in their sleep, while their daughter was removed from the house and vanished without a trace. What if the killings were not about Michael and Mary at all? What if Jennifer was the real target? Perhaps her parents were killed because they were in the way. It seemed like the only explanation that made sense. Jennifer was the one who was abducted. She was the one the killer wanted. The question was, why? As investigators shifted their focus to Jennifer's abduction, they also began to entertain another theory. Could someone close to Michael and Mary have been behind the killings? Someone with a personal grudge, a vendetta? They began to look into people from Michael's past, people who might have a reason to harm the family. One name that surfaced during the investigation was Garrison Bowman. Bowman, a man from North Carolina, had a connection to the Short family. He had been involved in some of Michael's business dealings, and while nothing concrete was ever found to link him to the murders, his name kept coming up. Was there something in his past with Michael that could have led to this horrific act? Or was he just another red herring in a case that had more questions than answers? Bowman's name never fully disappeared from the investigation, but despite suspicions and circumstantial evidence, he was never conclusively tied to the murders. He had an alibi, and no solid evidence ever linked him to the crime scene. Yet, for years, investigators couldn't shake the feeling that he might know more than he was letting on. But as the years passed, and no new leads came in, another disturbing possibility began to surface. Could the corruption within the Henry County Sheriff's Office have played a role in the case's mishandling? In 2006, several officers, including the sheriff himself, were indicted on charges of corruption. Some of these officers were involved in the original investigation, raising concerns that the case might have been compromised. Could it be that critical evidence was overlooked, or worse, intentionally suppressed? The thought that the investigation might have been compromised was terrifying, especially in a case as high-profile as this one. As the FBI took over the case in 2009, their first task was to sift through the thousands of leads that had been gathered in the years since the murders. They began to re-examine every piece of evidence, every witness, and every lead that had been considered. In 2009, the FBI released new sketches, one of a man seen near the Short family home just before the murders, and another of a white, single-cab, flatbed truck, which witnesses claimed to have seen parked nearby. These new sketches rekindled hope in the investigation, but even as fresh leads emerged, the clock was ticking. Time was running out, and the answers were still nowhere to be found. Theories continued to evolve. Was Garrison Bowman involved? Was the answer hidden in Michael's past dealings? Or was there another, more elusive explanation waiting to be uncovered? As the investigation ground on, the question remained: who would kill a family in such a brutal way, and why? What do you think? Could Garrison Bowman be the key to unlocking this mystery? Or is there someone else out there with the answers? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The truth is still out there, and the search for it continues. It has been more than 2 decades since that fateful night, when Michael and Mary Short were found murdered, and their young daughter Jennifer vanished without a trace. The case has lingered in the shadows, a haunting reminder that not all stories find resolution. But time has not erased the pain or the mystery. If anything, it has only deepened the questions. Each year, on the anniversary of the murders, the community comes together, remembering the family they lost and holding out hope that someone, somewhere, will come forward with the missing piece of the puzzle. The Short family's tragedy is not forgotten, not by the people who knew them, and certainly not by the people still fighting for justice. But despite the outpouring of support, the case has stubbornly refused to yield any answers. As the years go by, the pain of that night still echoes through Bassett and beyond. In 2019, a new chapter in this haunting story began when the Short family's former home was destroyed in a mysterious fire. Firefighters battled the flames, but by the time they had contained the blaze, the house was reduced to nothing but smoldering rubble. Was this fire an accident? Or was it an attempt to erase any remaining evidence of what happened inside those walls? Was it a cruel reminder of how the truth has remained buried for so long, or was it the last attempt to prevent someone from uncovering what really happened that night? No official cause for the fire was ever determined, but the timing of it, coming years after the murders, only fueled the suspicion that the blaze might not have been a coincidence. Some wondered if there was someone out there desperate to erase the last connection to the crime. It would not be the first time a crucial piece of evidence was destroyed in such a manner. The mystery of the Short family's murders may never be fully solved, but the community refuses to let their memory fade. Their pain is not just theirs. It belongs to the people of Bassett, to the neighbors who knew them, and to the countless others still searching for answers. The questions are too big to ignore, too deep to be left unasked. Why were Michael and Mary killed? Why was Jennifer taken from her home that night? And who did this? Despite the years of investigation, despite the countless tips, the case remains open. The Short family may be gone, but their story has not ended. Every lead, every theory, every sketch, only seems to bring more uncertainty. But there is one thing that has not changed: the promise to find justice for the Short family. The truth may be buried, but it is not forgotten. And the people who loved Michael, Mary, and Jennifer refused to give up the fight. They want justice, not just for the family, but for a community that deserves to know the truth. There is still hope. An $80,000 reward has been offered for information that could lead to an arrest. Someone knows what happened that night. Someone has the missing piece, the detail that could change everything. It might be a small piece of information, a name, a location, a recollection that was forgotten for years, but it could be the key to unlocking this case. The case of Michael, Mary, and Jennifer Short may have faded from the headlines, but it has not faded from the hearts of those who remember. The community is still here, still fighting, still waiting for the truth. And with each passing day, the hope remains. Hope that one day, someone will speak up. Someone will bring the truth to light. Someone will finally give the Short family the justice they deserve. Do you have any information? Or do you know someone who might? If so, now is the time to speak up. The case is still open, and the reward still stands. Share this story. Help us bring the truth to light. Help us find the justice that has been so long denied. Every town has its secrets, some more troubling than others. Bassett, Virginia, is a quiet, rural place, its roads winding through gentle hills and forgotten corners. But on one fateful night in 2002, it became the center of a mystery that has never left. Michael, Mary, and Jennifer Short were a family like any other, until they weren't. Their lives, and their deaths, have left a shadow that still hangs heavy over this community. The details are still fresh, despite the years that have passed. It was a crime executed with terrifying precision. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, and yet, two people were brutally murdered in their own home, while their young daughter vanished without a trace. The house was left undisturbed, untouched by the hands of a thief, but marked by something far worse. Time has not softened the truth, if anything, it has sharpened it. Every year, as the anniversary of the murders approaches, the questions resurface. Why were Michael and Mary killed? What was the connection between their deaths and the abduction of their daughter? Was it all planned, or did something snap that night? There are no answers, only shadows. The unanswered questions remain. Was Jennifer the intended target all along, or was she an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire of a deadly scheme? Why was she taken, and why did her parents have to die for her to be taken? These are questions that, more than 20 years later, still haunt the minds of those who knew them. The investigation may have seemed to stall at times, with leads that went nowhere, suspects who were never proven guilty, and theories that drifted into the realm of speculation. Even with the involvement of the FBI, the case remains open, yet cold. And the people who once stood together in hopes of justice now sit in a quiet uncertainty, wondering if the answers will ever come. Then came the fire, a fire that consumed what was left of the Short family's home in 2019. A fire that burned everything to the ground. Was this simply an accident, or was it an attempt to destroy any final remnants of evidence? To those who have followed the case, it feels like an intentional act, an effort to bury the past once and for all. And yet, the ashes left behind are only more questions. The fire was a cruel reminder that justice is still far from being served. The case remains open, though the answers seem just as distant as they ever were. The people who loved Michael, Mary, and Jennifer Short have not given up hope, but time has a way of eroding even the strongest of convictions. The clock is ticking, and with each passing year, the possibility of finding the truth grows smaller. For those who knew them, the loss is immeasurable. For those still searching for answers, the mystery is unbearable. The killer is still out there, somewhere, hiding in the shadows. And someone, somewhere, may know more than they realize. If you have any information about the case, no matter how small it might seem, please contact authorities. Your voice could be the one that finally breaks the silence. And if you want to learn more about this case, or others like it, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Together, we can uncover the truth that has been buried for far too long.